Venezuela's president of 14 years will not be sworn in for another term on Thursday, while Hugo Chavez battles the complications of a fourth cancer operation in Cuba. His supporters, well, they have reason to worry about his uncertain health, of course, and about his succession. The Supreme Court this Wednesday rubber stamping the decision to delay that inauguration, insisting there is no power vacuum since he was already the outgoing president. But the longer he's away, the more there's wavering over who his constitutional heir really is. On the one hand, there's the vice president, Nicolas Maduro, Chavez's chosen successor. On the other, the Speaker of the National Assembly, Diosdado Cabello, who takes over if there is a power vacuum before he can be sworn in. As we wait on Chavez and the Supreme Court's decision on what happens in the end, it's not just Venezuela waiting on a charismatic former coup leader whose oil money-fueled policies and firebrand anti-American pronouncements put him at the vanguard of what's been a left-wing wave, some would say a Bolivarian wave, across South America the past decade. Today in the France 24 debate, we ask, what is the legacy of Hugo Chavez? With us to talk about it, our correspondent in Caracas, Sarah Granger. From London, we're joined by journalist Colin Harding, director of consultancy Latin Forum. Welcome to the debate, sir. He is one of the founders of the anti-globalization movement Attaque, Bernard Cassen, of the civic forum Les Mémoires de Lutte, the Memories of Struggle, is with us. Thank you for being with us. Thank you. And academic and opposition academic Rolando Tomasini, who, full disclaimer, voted for the opposition in the most recent presidential election. The France 24 debate, where you can always join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. Now, the decision coming in, the head of the Supreme Court telling a Caracas press conference that there is no problem with the delay. President Chavez is a sitting president. It's not like as if he'd never been sworn in before. As long as Parliament approves his prolonged absence, which he has, then so far, all is well.
We have read Article 231 to interpret it. It is a simple constitutional mandate. There are no complexities. It clearly indicates that the inauguration of the President of the Republic is a formality that needs to be tended to, and it is necessary, but it does not mean that it stops the ongoing mandate or that a new constitutional term cannot start.
So, Sarah Granger, you'll forgive me, but I'm still scratching my head after that statement, since, after all, tomorrow, Thursday, was supposed to be the last day of that mandate that she mentions.
It was, but essentially what the Supreme Court has done is to approve or to take the same stance as the government has done, and to say that, their interpretation of the Constitution is that, there is provision for delaying the inauguration, even though the Constitution states the date of the 10th of January. It also does state in a different clause that if for some reason the inauguration can't take place before the National Assembly, it can take place before the Supreme Court. And so they're using that clause to say that a delay is possible.
So there was one of the reporters at that press conference who asked why don't they go to Cuba to for that swearing in. She sort of didn't really address that question.
No, they haven't addressed that question, and the government is relatively touchy about questions around how much influence Cuba is having. It's interesting that President Chavez has chosen to take almost all his treatment in Havana. He's there now, and so we get very sporadic updates on his health condition, and also how much influence, how much work he's actually able to do as president. We don't know if he's able to take decisions, if he's able to have discussions with his ministers, or if, in fact, he's too sick even to participate in that sense. So it's interesting that he is in Cuba, and it's interesting that the government likes to keep that a separate issue.
And just let's be clear very briefly here on the timeline now. Moving forward, no date set for his swearing in. For now, we're still in this state of limbo, right?
Indeed, both the National Assembly yesterday, when it voted in favour of allowing him more time, and also the Supreme Court today, when it sort of legally endorsed that, neither of them put a deadline on when he should be back in the country or when another inauguration should take place. So essentially, we're in this kind of holding pattern for days, possibly weeks, or possibly months.
Rolando Tomasini, I see you shaking your head.
Absolutely, because the current state we are is absolute uncertainty. I mean, before leaving to Cuba on his last treatment, he clearly stated that he wanted the Constitution to be respected, the Constitution that he himself wrote and that we have been honoring. Today, what we have is a very creative interpretation of the Constitution, and in that sense, we're not really giving any certainty to the country. We're in a period of uncertainty, not only about when he will be able to come back to the country, but what is his current state, as Sarah pointed out, of health. Is he able to actually govern the country? Is he able to make complete decisions that represent the needs of the country? And in the future, even if he were to be sworn in the next few days, what is the ongoing health condition of his state in order for us to trust him as a country?
Did the Supreme Court, under the circumstances, make the right decision?
I think if we have to go back into the constitutional articles. I mean, we've been citing 231, we've been citing 233, 234. These are key articles that state that his mandate would end at this point and a new mandate would commence. He's a president re-elected, which doesn't mean that he goes on to the next term. He means that he has to be sworn in to the next term. So this is actually a crucial step, for us to start a new mandate for him.
Bernard Cassen, I see you brought a copy of the Venezuelan Constitution with you.
Of course, and I think the Article 2.
The book there, show it to us here. It's a little blue book there.
Well, most Venezuelans have the Constitution.
Indeed.
Sometime in their pockets.
Indeed.
As you probably know.
Something we should take
sort
with
of
pride.
brandish it at times.
Absolutely.
Well, I disagree with your interpretation of Article 231. I've read it, and the article explicitly says, as your correspondent said, that if the president cannot be sworn in before the National Assembly, he can be sworn in before the Supreme Court, and there is no deadline in the Constitution. So, no deadline as to when he can be sworn in before the Supreme Court. So I think there is no other solution, because the other solution would be to resort, as the opposition does, to Article 233, which contemplates a situation in which the president is permanently incapacitated. And there is an exhaustive list of the possibilities. It can be resignation, it can be death, it can be physical or mental permanent incapacity certified by a medical commission appointed by the Supreme Court and approved by Parliament. We are not at all in this situation. We do not know exactly what the situation is, but Chavez is certainly not dead. He hasn't resigned, and there has been no medical commission appointed, etc. Et so I think this is a very wise decision, both by the National Assembly yesterday it was, and by the Supreme Court today.
Colin Harding, this takes us back to the point that was made by Sarah Granger. A lot of people would love to get on a plane to Cuba and find out what the situation is.
Well, that's what the opposition have been suggesting. Of course, referring to what the last speaker said, we don't definitely know that Chavez is not dead. He probably isn't, but we don't know that, because one thing that's interesting is that the permission that was sought for Chavez to absent himself, which was granted by the National Assembly yesterday, the permission request didn't come from Chavez, it came from Maduro, the vice president, and was read out to the Assembly by Cabello, by Diosdado Cabello, the Speaker of the Assembly. So we don't know if Chavez is in touch with anybody. We have no idea what his state is. So a delegation to try and find out wouldn't actually be a bad idea, I think.
Let's try to recall some of the points you make. Before he flew to Cuba last month for his latest cancer operation, Chavez clearly stated his preference for avoiding a power vacuum.
Take Nicolas Maduro as the president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
There he was, brandishing that constitution. On Tuesday, the vice president and the Speaker of the Assembly downplaying any differences, the latter evoking And we're going to mention again another article, 231 of that Constitution, that states if for any reason the president cannot be sworn in before the National Assembly, he'll take the oath before the Supreme Court.
Because of this, we invoke Article 231 of the Constitution of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela in order to formalize at a later date the corresponding swearing in front of the Supreme Court.
The president is currently the republic's president, its head of state, and the head of the government, so at no point in time has he been absent. On the contrary, it does not even qualify as a temporary absence, nor a permanent absence.
Sarah Granger, how is the opposition reacting?
Well, some anger from the opposition about what's happened, and really they've run out of avenues of ways to pursue this issue, because the National Assembly and the Supreme Court are really the two institutions in Venezuela that can make a decision about this, and they have both sided with the government. They have already written a letter to the Organization of American States earlier this week, asking them to get involved, or at least expressing their concern about the situation. And of course, one suspects that what they might look to do is to try and galvanize some support for their point of view from other governments or other political bodies in the region. But we know, for instance, that the OAS has a very rocky relationship with Mr. Chavez's government, so it's unlikely that they could bring any influence to bear in this situation.
And it's not just, by the way, the opposition weighing in on the discussion. So has, in the past few days, the Catholic Church.
To
alter the constitution to attain a political objective is morally unacceptable.
Colin Harding, for those of us who don't know Venezuela, to hear the church weigh in on these kinds of matters, is that something normal?
Well, it's not unknown. They've had a very difficult relationship with the government and with President Chavez. So they've often been at odds, and it's not entirely surprising that the Church have taken a contrary view to the government, to the National Assembly, which is in the government's hands, and to the Supreme Court, which is also in the pocket of the government. So I think it does reflect the extreme polarization of public life in Venezuela, that these institutions are taking these contrary views.
Polarization of public life. Rolando Tomasini, it's been said by some that if there were a snap election, the opposition may not be ready for it.
The problem is that, I mean, we have to separate the current debate from the technicalities of the Constitution from the opposition. The state in which we are today, within the next 48 hours, has nothing to do with the opposition. In fact, it has to do with how well we apply the Constitution. Getting to an election would take still another 6 months and several steps within within our government, which would declare indeed that he's incapacitated to rule temporarily, twice temporarily, and then permanently to call for elections again. So the figure of election is actually quite far in our timeline. But let's not forget, though, that today, whether he's capacitated or not, it's still pretty opaque. Whether his mandate goes on and spills over the next one is still pretty opaque. And even though the Constitution says, as was read earlier by our colleague, that he could be sworn in later on, it doesn't specify when he can be sworn in, where he can be sworn in. So in other words, we could be in this state of limbo for another 6 months, 2 years if we wanted.
Sarah Granger, on that point, earlier we showed the statements there by both the Vice President and the Speaker of the Assembly saying that they're singing from the same hymn sheet. Are there cracks, are there signs that if Chavez does succumb to cancer, that suddenly things may crumble?
Well, I actually think that the United Socialist Party has done a very good job so far of putting up a united front. And in the last almost month that Mr. Chavez has been away, the hierarchy that they have organized amongst themselves seems to have worked very smoothly. And there seems to be no real sign of tension, certainly between Mr. Maduro and Mr. Cabello. That's talked about a lot, the fact that the two men who are really, at the forefront of running the country at the moment are very different characters, come from very different backgrounds, and represent very different aspects of Mr. Chavez's socialist movement. Mr. Maduro, a much more grassroots trade unionist who worked his way up through the party. A former bus driver, as you say. And Mr. Cabello was in the military and actually took part in a failed coup attempt with Mr. Chavez back in the early 1990s. So I think that's where the speculation comes from about the fact that they're very different people and possibly with competing ideas about where the Socialist Party should go. But so far they have appeared to have gotten along very well and have put on a very good united front.
All right. We're pleased, by the way, to welcome a late arrival who's fallen prey, it seems, to Paris traffic. But we want to thank her for joining us. All the same, Natalia Brandler, a Venezuelan political scientist. Thank you for being with us. I want to read a couple of reactions. Bernard Cassen, before... Yes.
I think that the Constitution has strange supporters. The opposition has fought consistently this Constitution. So I do not think it's opposition leaders are the best commentators of the Constitution. As to the Church is an opposition force. Obviously, the church hierarchy took part in the coup d'etat of 2002. They were part and parcel of the coup d'etat. So it's an institution which one of the most reactionary of all Latin America, and which has consistently been opposed to Chavez. So it's no surprise that I don't know.
I'm not sure we can go as far as saying that they participated in the coup d'etat.
They participated, yes.
Not sure.
And
we can say that officially, but
no, I can't say that officially because I discussed with some of the participants of the coup d'etat, and they told because they stated it openly. And they will recognize it. So I think there is a lot of political, legal bickering, which is nonsensical. Let's try to say what is behind the scenes. Well, first, the opposition does its job as opposition, and it tries to create difficulties to oppose Diosdado Cabello and Nicolas Maduro. It tries to say that the Constitution is being violated, etc. But in truth, it's not ready to face a snap election because there are competing leaders, and I think they want to buy time. That's all. I think none of them is very keen to have an election in a very shortly.
I disagree in that sense because quite recently we had an election and actually we did see quite strong support from the opposition. Not enough to win the presidency, but the support was quite...
But the opposition lost 4 governorships. The Chavista party gained in 20 states out of 23.
We're talking about two different levels. We're talking at 2 different levels. So we don't have a clear lecture of that. I mean, I think we're jumping to conclusions too fast to say that the opposition is not ready today to actually face elections. That will be a jump into conclusions too fast.
All right, and just 2 quick reactions that we'll read to you on Twitter. One from a guerrilla tweet who says, there are some perverted and desperate people paid by foreign powers in order to disclaim the popular will. And Takunda in Harare, Zimbabwe, who says, die a silent death or bring chaos to the nation. That's why they don't want him gone. Kind of reminds me of our own President Mugabe, is what he says. When we come back, we're going to look at the legacy of Hugo Chavez. I want to thank, by the way, Sarah Granger, who I know has to file, for being with us here for part 1. But stay with us, much more to come in the France 24 debate.
Seamos un tilín mejores y un poco menos egoístas. Saludos. Muchas gracias, presidente.